Good evening. Welcome to an LA Public Radio partnership of KCRW and KPCC LAS. This is a series of virtual events called Meet the Candidates. I'm Steve Chiatakis, host of Greater LA on KCRW, and we're here at the Annenberg Performance Studio at KCRW headquarters in Santa Monica, California. Today, we're talking to one of the people seeking to represent the 3rd District in the LA County Board of Supervisors, which covers a massive area from Malibu to Santa Monica, from West Hollywood all the way up to Porter Ranch in the San Fernando Valley, over to Calabasas, Agoura Hills, other areas of the valley. There's a primary election set for June 7th, of course, a general election for November 8th, later this year of 2022. Now, these virtual events, as has been advertised, are part of a coverage made possible by support from the Committee for Greater LA in partnership with the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation and the Weingart Foundation. We've received questions from a lot of folks for the candidates, from you, and thank you for providing questions if you have indeed given us some. We invite you, the audience, of course, to share your questions throughout the conversation tonight as well. You can submit your questions through the Q&A function that's located, I believe, on the right. Let's see if that's my left. Your right, the right side of the screen. Live captioning is also available. Just click the CC button at the bottom of the video, and you'll see the words scrolled out on the screen. Our guest tonight is State Senator Henry Stern. He currently represents California's 27th Senate District. That includes parts of Los Angeles and Ventura counties. He's an environmental attorney, and he was born in Malibu. Senator Stern, welcome to you.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Like I said, the first of several that we're going to have this week. You were first elected to office 6 years ago, correct?
I think that's right. Feels longer.
Does it really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd never been in office before, you know? And this has been a long 6.
You were the first millennial elected to office. To the state senate. Yeah.
Is that a good thing?
I think so.
I'm an old millennial.
Yeah.
So I was like,
when I was saying you're an old soul.
I was there when Facebook was a book, and then became the Facebook. So I feel like I
after
almost
MySpace,
get it.
Though, right after MySpace.
Yeah, but it was literally down the hall from me in college, and I don't know. I feel like I guess I understand some of that new currency, but I still like the book.
You're okay. We've established you're a millennial. You've done this for 6 years.
Reluctantly.
Reluctant millennial, the accidental millennial. 6 years you've been in Sacramento.
Yeah.
Why change jobs? Why leave so soon?
Because LA needs all of us to fix this county and this town. I mean, Sacramento, you can get a lot of good work done, and I'm a policy wonk. That's sort of I started out not in politics, right? I hadn't really run for office before 16. So I've written some good bills, I think, and helped get some legislation through. But when you're walking down the street in LA and you see someone just dying right in front of you, you want to stop and help. And I don't know, I can't walk by it anymore. So the crisis feels like it's right here. And, we've been trying to prove out this bigger thesis of what a democratically controlled government can do. California, even in Washington. But if we can't make it work in LA, I'm worried we're going to lose people's faith in government to be able to deliver. So I don't know. I didn't have this grand plan in mind. It was just one of those things that I've been working on these issues. We've been hitting bottlenecks in local government. And so I want to get my hands on it, see if we can fix it.
Do you think you have the experience, again, having been only there for 6 years in Sacramento, to do something like this?
I like to think I don't have too much experience in politics. I think if you're in it too long, you learn lessons that you maybe shouldn't, about how a deal gets done or, what the machine needs or, we always did it this way and this is how we're going to do it again. So I like to think I've been in there just enough to actually know what's going on, but not so long that I learned the lessons of all the things that can't be done. I think we need some new thinking. So,
who's been doing it for too long, do you think?
I mean,
I'm putting you on the spot.
No, but I mean, a lot of people. I mean, in this race, I'm running against the former majority leader and speaker of the assembly, and I came into the Senate as like. I got the nickname from him of being the young squire, right? And trying to say, learn your ways and take your time. And a lot of people told me when I was running for office, like, you need to wait, right? Like, I'm about to turn 40. They're saying, just wait your turn and it'll come around. I guess for me, I don't know, I think young people in LA need a voice. And I think that it isn't just a generational divide. I think that everyone in LA needs some kind of fresh thinking. So it's not just my opponent. It's more just the currency of politics right now feels very selfish. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why politics has evolved that way, that everyone's chasing the ribbon cutting, but no one's like helping each other out when they're in a jam. That part, just for some reason, even though we're all on essentially the same team, same party, same goals, somehow we're sort of end-arounding each other. And that's the part I don't like.
This is one of the most powerful local government jobs in the country. When you think of LA County, there are 10 million people in LA County. You would represent, you're one of 5, if you did go on to win. You would represent 2 million people of those 10 million people. That's more than Montana or the Dakotas put together. It's a big responsibility. We got a couple of audience questions about this. Do you think the Board of Supervisors should be expanded?
Yeah, I get that a lot. The way I answer it is maybe. Maybe that's hedging, but I'm not averse to it. I think that adding more representation is a good thing, but if we actually found a way for the city and the county to work together, I don't think we'd need to do it. So the idea I've been toying with is to offer to the voters a choice and say, let's give ourselves a shot clock here, right? Let's tell the voters of LA County, if we can figure it out and figure out how to play nice with each other and solve some real problems, then we can keep the governance structure as is. And if we can't figure it out in, say, the next 2 years or 4 years, then rethink it altogether. I mean, how San Francisco operates, I'm not saying it's going particularly peachy up there, but one unified government is something that folks have been talking about for a while. But at this point, I do think there's a way to sort of have the county have their roles, have our cities have their roles, and not have to add more elections to this and more politicians. That's always my concern. It's like just adding more elected officials. I don't know if it solves the problem, but it indicates a frustration amongst people that like they're not being heard. So I think they're right about that.
Someone who is up for re-election is Alex Villanueva, who's the county sheriff, current sheriff of LA County. He and his department face allegations of civil rights violations, misconduct, financial mismanagement, deputy gangs reportedly there, a record of clashing with the board and other county officials, including the Inspector General, whom we've spoken to on our program as well, and the Civilian Oversight Commission. How do you deal with an Alex Villanueva with these issues, and should he be reelected? Do you think there's a better candidate for the job?
I didn't support him the first time, and learned a little bit of a lesson there in that, when you put politics and public safety together, it's a very serious combination with very sacred work. And what I mean by that is, the work of an everyday deputy out there of making moral decisions underlying this very complicated job.
That's any law enforcement official, though.
It is, yeah. And it's one of the hardest jobs there is, period. And so when you have a dynamic where the politics and the posture are dictating the nature of the conversation, and right now that's what it is between the Board of Supervisors and the sheriff, it is so unproductive. And I think that, we're all going to suffer as a result of that. I think, the sheriff wants us to talk about him and wants pulls the attention his way through sometimes comments that are intended to, jab at you or elicit a reaction. I don't really want to take that bait at this point. I mean, what I'm trying to do is do some work to actually help the sheriff's department rebuild itself, right? Like invest in mental health for post-traumatic stress injuries. We changed the law on that, or actually get beyond an 18% training ratio. So not so much divide the line of like, are you for law enforcement and whatever the sheriff says, or do you want to get rid of all funding for them and gut it? And I swear there's some other choice between those two. That's what's bothering me about the current dynamic is that folks are in camps, and I think the general citizen, when there's an incident where you want to call 911, like you definitely want someone to be there, and there are real crimes and issues like that. But the problem is we've asked the sheriff's department to do all these other jobs too, and this sheriff, nor any sheriff, is really the right person to do them.
Do you think the sheriff should be elected, or should it be an appointed? This is another audience question, by the way. Should this be an appointed position?
Yeah, we looked at that in some state legislation, actually, around changing state law, because that's a function in some ways of state law. But I think this election will be the test of whether it's actually working. I'm not ready to say to take away people's choice in that way. I guess what I would say is making sure that there's accountability, not just the sheriff doing oversight of the sheriff, but the kind of conflicts that the inspector general is facing, that you won't even come in to testify on a subpoena. That's unacceptable. So I think we could stick with an elected sheriff if there's going to be some clarification that they don't just get to do whatever they want, and that there is some public policy and some protocol that still applies, and that the County Board of Supervisors has something to do with that. So I think this election will be the test of that.
Something the county has committed to do is what's called a care first, jails last policy. And you probably are familiar with it. This includes closing Men's Central downtown, replacing it with housing and supportive services as well. And there was a big $2 billion plan, putting a facility in the Antelope Valley, I believe. There were so many plans, actually. And replacing, the central jail with housing and supportive services. Now there are activists who say that the transition to close a jail is happening way too slowly. So I want to ask a couple of questions about that. Number one, with thousands of people with serious mental illness at Men's Central, do you support moving people with mental health issues, mental illness, out of jails?
I do. I actually passed a bill that most people didn't cover last year because it flew beneath the radar, but it required those who were misdemeanor defendants in Men's Central Jail awaiting trial, who had been deemed incompetent to stand trial. Basically, their attorney said they didn't even have the capacity to make a decision for themselves or look out for their own welfare. That they were their mental illness was so severe that they were incompetent to stand trial, and yet they're sitting in jail. So what we forced is, rather than just kick them back out on the street, which is basically what we're doing in Men's Central Jail right now. We hold somebody for 24 or 48 hours, maybe even longer, go through this sort of traumatic cycle and all the predation that happens in there on somebody who has mental illness, and then kick them out on the street with no plan at all. And it seems like there needs to be a different strategy. So I guess I've been taking the reins on that Care First Jails Last strategy, just in that we went and got about 220 people who were sitting on trial and got them placed in subacute psychiatric care and gave them credit for that time. So it's not as if you don't get a sentence, or you aren't, when you're arrested for whatever that misdemeanor or that crime was, it's not as if we're saying you don't go into any treatment or any care at all, right? And you get spit back out on the street. In fact, we think people may actually stay in county care longer than they would if they were in the jail system once they're in a subacute psychiatric care facility or a boarding care facility. But we need to compel that care in those cases because people are so at risk. But I just think I don't think Central Jail is the way to do it. They're not. It's our de facto mental health services system for LA, and it's broken.
Well, de facto, you say, and again, when you have thousands of people who have some sort of mental health issue inside the jails, how do you do that? What mental health professionals do you tap into, to be able to help those folks, because the apparatus is not there?
It's true. And what wasn't happening was Department of Mental Health wasn't talking to corrections. I mean, that's essentially it. So the bill forced a notification of the mental health department, said these people are eligible for immediate release under whatever Prop 47 or 109 or whatever realignment. They're eligible for early release, but before they're just released back in the street, we're going to let you know. And turns out when mental health was notified that someone who had been decompensating with severe schizophrenia or psychosis,
they're on the radar.
We're on their radar. That name that is then on their case management docket, they have to take responsibility for that person and not just recycle them onto the street. Because the prison to homelessness pipeline is the secret, sort of driving force behind this unrelenting sprawl of poverty and loss we have.
And by the way, we will be talking about homelessness. Obviously, it's a major issue in this election. We're talking with State Senator Henry Stern, running for the LA County Board of Supervisors, District 3. This is the seat being vacated by Sheila Kuehl. I do want to invite a community member who submitted a question to ask it to you, State Senator Stern. Leanne Knighton is with us. Leanne, what is your question for the senator?
I wanted to challenge the candidate to ride public transportation. More specifically, the Metro B line or D line. No one can ride without seeing drugs or feces or blood or urine. What would you do to improve public transportation?
Thank you for that question. I'm an Orange Line rider, being a Valley guy. So
Those are the buses. Right?
yeah, well,
the
that's
busway.
like and it's dedicated though. So it's
Right.
bus rapid transit,
Right,
and
right.
someday light rail, and someday the 405 connection. But how are we going to go tell people to ride bus rapid transit, and how are we going to tell the drivers to drive the buses if they're worried about their own security? And so, I mean, COVID's made a lot of people uncomfortable with mass transit. I still believe in it. I'm not giving up on public transit. But what I would say is, we've actually got to have an adequate security presence there. We can't just rely on the drivers who have their backs to everyone sitting on the bus to manage it. I'd like to see mental health professionals on rapid response able to triage. And I actually think in some ways you can find people before they make bad decisions and end up, say, in the jail system. But if they're there on that bus riding along and they literally have nowhere to go, and that is their home, I don't want to put that burden on other people riding the bus to navigate that. But if we were able to deploy rapid response, say home teams or psychiatric teams to those buses, and there was a motion on that recently before the county board. I think Han put that forward. So I'd like to see dedicated teams to each line: B, D, purple, expo, orange, red. I mean, we got a whole system, but yeah, I know how that is. I mean, I lived in Canoga Park, ride my bicycle around. This is before I got married and had a kid, and she's 6 months, so she's not going on the bicycle yet. But it's I don't think I don't think you're off to feel uncomfortable with those circumstances. I don't think it's fair to ask you to brave that, and especially if we want to get all of LA riding public transit by 2028, we got to step up. And so, not necessarily a sheriff's presence, but I'd say consistent help from county services, and maybe having a dedicated arm within Metro to do that.
Thank you, Leanne. We appreciate it. As I mentioned earlier, we've received questions already, but you can share your questions as well online, as we've talked about submitting them through the Q&A function that's located on the right side of your screen. So I would hope that you would do that, and we'll get to some of those questions again a little bit later in this broadcast. You are an environmental attorney by trade, right? Why, first of all?
Maybe it's partly, getting to grow up in a place as amazing as Los Angeles. To correct the record, I was born in New York, so I can't claim full.
You weren't born in Malibu.
Full Angelino. No,
You're not from the Boo.
Man, I mean, we got so lucky when we got to Malibu. When I was 10 years old, we showed up. I was born in New York. My parents were both in theater. My dad's an actor still, and my mom was a cook, but he hit it. He got a movie, Born in East LA, back in the day with Cheech that was
Cheech Marin, yeah.
brought us out to LA, and everything changed. And when we got to Malibu, it was like, wow, I can breathe. This is amazing. My sister got asthma living in the heart of LA. I went to Warner Avenue growing up, so right like in that Benedict Canyon area and all. That's where the environmental part of me grew, was like watching my sister not be able to breathe, and I'm 6 years old. I'm just moved in from the city. And
That's a lot of people, by the way, who can't afford to live in Malibu.
yeah, exactly. And we got so lucky as kids, and we had this dad who hit it and was funny on TV and the movies, and like changed my life forever. But I never quite got used to it. I still think I'm a city kid, sort of trapped in a surfer's, whatever.
What are the concrete things that you would do to address the climate crisis?
Well, it starts here at home. I think people want to solve the climate crisis as a global solution, and I've been working on that for a long time. Helped work on Inconvenient Truth when it was coming out back in the day, and we marched in college, and we had a virtual march across the country, and then I sued polluters, and then I worked for the federal government for a while, and worked for Henry Waxman when we were 2009, when Obama came in. I wrote the big national climate legislation that moved through the House as the attorney, like the guy you stick
Former
in the basement.
congressman, sure.
Yeah, but I wasn't out there at the press conferences. I had like a desk about that big and writing bills. And then I went to work for Fran Pavley, who showed that state has real power in changing like the automotive industry, right? One bill forced the entire automotive industry around the world to start making cleaner cars because California has a nice waiver in the Clean Air Act. And
other states as well now.
Well, now they're all under that waiver, and everything's changing. And they sued us for a decade, and then we finally broke through, and then they sued us again. But that's all changing because it's changing state law. But when FEMA came out with a report about 2 years ago and said LA County, from a climate perspective, is the single riskiest county in the entire country for all these disasters we're going to face. And when I lost my place in 2018 in Woolsey Fire. I was renting, and I had that burned down. I had a bunch of my friends and family's houses burned down, and had my grandparents stuck on PCH trying to evacuate, and my grandfather ended up in like an ICU, and a couple months, it went downhill from there. We lost him a few months later, and watching the trauma of displacement made those FEMA numbers make sense, right? Because if you're going to move 11 million people around a disaster zone and expect that to work out well, you've got your head in the sand. So, if we're going to fix this, it's about flood management in LA, using Sepulveda Basin to catch stormwater, and hopefully not, when the superstorms come, take out Reseda or Winnetka or Canoga. It's about a wildfire management strategy that isn't just fighting it after the fact, but getting the riskiest fire county in the country to harden their communities and get ahead of it. So I think at a county level, resilience, which is the sort of, it's not just about driving that electric car or getting solar and storage. It is about those things, and it is about shutting down some of our oil and gas facilities and moving forward. But to me, resilience is the connector. Like, it's 121 degrees on any given day in the San Fernando Valley, right? In the middle of Canoga Park, where you have people who are working outdoors in overcrowded apartments, and they don't have a functional air conditioner. There are deaths from climate change happening right now that we just simply don't track as such or count as such. But I think if county uses its care first strategy, but applies care to climate and utilizes that kind of workforce, the people who check on seniors who are living at home, right? IHSS workers, they're already checking on the most vulnerable 600,000 or so residents. Can you check and make sure the AC is working and they're not having heat stroke? Or can you make sure they have an evacuation plan? It's the nitty gritty part. It's the sort of FEMA emergency worker side of climate that I think LA County has primacy. And to me, it's about triaging disasters at this point. We're going to try to shut down Aliso Canyon too, and try to move past Playa and get past all the oil drilling in South LA. But county's sort of a unspoken and unnoticed lever for what climate advocacy can be.
Number one, it's not 121 degrees in the San Fernando Valley on any given day. It can get really hot.
Sure.
Right?
Well, there were a few.
Yeah. I mean, it's been hot. The record in LA is 113, by the way.
No, 121, Woodland Hills.
Was it really?
Oh, yeah. I got fresh data. UCLA.
Maybe I'm thinking city of LA then. But Woodland Hills is city of LA.
We're in the city.
Yeah.
It was Canoga Park. It was on that Bank of America
this may
tower
be Civic
that
Center
day.
LA, but yes,
So,
it can't.
but
But not on any given day. That's what I'm parsing words.
On any given day going forward, so the average temperatures are expected over the next 15 years to 20 years, based on the UCLA report. They just did it. About 5 degrees increase we can anticipate over
No
the next
doubt,
couple
it's
of days.
warming up. Absolutely, no doubt.
But anyway, good correct.
Well, no,
journalistic.
and it's not a got you. It's just as a weather nerd myself,
man.
I keep up with stuff like that.
121 was a lot, though.
It's a lot. It's a lot. I can only imagine. And you mentioned Aliso Canyon.
Yeah.
You've led the charge to get it shut down. It's still open,
Yeah, it's not only open; they're using it more.
and they're expanding it.
Right, so they expanded usage last winter. The governor said he wants an expeditious closure. Senator Feinstein said she wants it. The mayor said he wants it.
It's still open.
The county board, exactly. So how are we actually going to work through that? I think that we got to have a plan for how to actually replace it. In our bill, it's not just like shut it down and close your eyes. It's how do we put the gas workforce to work in more productive industries? And frankly, how do we displace the need for that? So can we find battery storage to displace that? Can we even use Aliso Canyon as a site to put solar and batteries up there as opposed to pumping the hills full of gas? I think, look, this stuff is big. These are tectonic plates within the energy system of LA. And you can't just pull one piece out and expect it all to work. But I'm insisting on, not relenting there, because the taxpayers of LA are going to pay for that damage. That is still the geology out there. They're on a fault in the middle, on the backside of Northridge. We have to solve our way through this. So it's sort of forcing us to embrace renewable energy, maybe faster than people want to, but I think the climate's on the same timeline too.
We have another community member here, a gentleman named Nick Sunback is with us. Hi, Nick. Welcome. What's your question?
The county has record funding to build homeless shelters and transportation infrastructure, yet we fall ever farther behind in congestion, transit, ridership, traffic deaths, homelessness, housing costs, and population growth. How have you addressed this in your current role?
You got me, Nick. That's a lot. You packed a lot in there. But in all seriousness, I don't know that money's the problem right now. I really do think there's something broken about our politics that people think kind of jurisdictionally. You know, what's happened in my district, that's how a lot of my colleagues talk in Sacramento and in the city. Everyone wants to cut the ribbon in their district. They want their line. I think about, you want to talk about B and D, right? When we're talking about those transit lines, they affect what the orange line's doing. You don't ride the red line and somehow the purple line is separate, or Santa Monica somehow has some different traffic destiny than the San Fernando Valley, right? Everyone's burdened by the 405 freeway. And, worse yet, when you want to bring up homelessness, everyone has a shared stake in that. People living on the streets are not feeling safe. The people in their communities don't know what to do. We audited the county a couple years ago, and I led that audit up in Sacramento, and it was a bit controversial at the time because they're saying, well, you don't have to dig into our books, it's going fine. But when we kicked the tires on what was happening there, the millionaire's tax, Prop 63, is one of the big sources of that money for mental health. There was almost $1 billion sitting in the coffers. And I think at the same time we're asking people to tax themselves, to step up on H or HHH, I think we've got to go back to voters now and say we're going to do everything within our power with the existing money, not with new money, but to solve these challenges, to get the per unit cost down so that we're paying, under $250,000 a unit. Right now we're up in the 500s range, so that's got to happen, prefab and expedited permitting. But it's also going to be about having abundance on the service side to accompany this housing first strategy, right? So right now, the experience of someone who, say, has acute schizophrenia, who's sleeping, on the street and has an addiction challenge too, and they have a substance use disorder, but they're not so gravely disabled that they're going to be brought into care by force, right? A lot of people talk about conservatorships, right? Those are the kinds of people that I'm talking about, but not people who are so lost that the county has to compel their care, but what about everyone else who's just right up against that line, who needs help? We've got about 30 people on the team countywide doing all of that mobile psychiatric work, prescribing medication on the street, trying to help people connect back to what their SSI or how to get back on their Medi-Cal reimbursement. It's not enough people. I think investing in the operations and the personnel side, in addition to all the housing investment we need to do, is everything. Because you have to show up again and again and again. And you have to know people by name. And you can't just approach homelessness as this sort of general population or the homeless community as one set of people. People have to know each other by name. So what we'd like to see is taking some of that 950 and having dedicated home teams. In other words, these mobile psychiatric teams, precinct by precinct, divvied out, not unlike how we organize the sheriff's department or LAPD, but with a completely non-carceral attitude, right? A completely care-driven attitude, but so that you can pick up the phone as an Angelino and call not 911, but a different number, and have someone there in less than an hour. Right now, if you go on the app, there's an app called Hop LA, and if you see someone who looks like they're in dire need, you can log in. I've logged in about, 58 times over the last 2 years. Literally, I count. And I've not yet had a single case fixed. And I gotta tell you, it is like completely dejecting just as someone who wants to help, who feels disempowered with that. So we gotta break the impasse on, is it housing first or is it services? And just do it at the same time. And if we show people that we've spent every last penny and spent it efficiently, then maybe we can come back and say, we need everyone to pitch into this affordable housing trust, or we need everyone to kind of tighten their belts and we're gonna go for one more. But until then, yeah, I don't know, whether it's Measure M or H or HHH, there's a lot of money flowing through the system. So yeah, I think we'll lose LA's trust if we're too aggressive right now and saying, just write us a few more checks and we'll be fine. We've gotta do the work ourselves.
Thank you, Nick. It's heartbreaking to see people who are obviously having some mental health emergency, or some sort of, it could be anything, someone who is unhoused on the streets. And I wonder, when you look at some of the things that are going on right now, where there are people who are forcibly moved from encampments.
Yep.
And it's being sold as we're moving them into housing. but then you find out, ergo, no housing. Or maybe, out of 150 people, I think it was evidenced in Echo Park.
Echo Park,
8
exactly.
people got some sort of housing out of that.
Totally.
How do you do that without, just disrupting everything? These are human beings. These are lives.
Yes, and yet Mitch O'Farrell has to go figure out how to sort through Echo Park with whatever tools he has at his disposal. Which unfortunately, there was an LAPD forward kind of presence there, and they'd been trying to do the casework leading up to
There
it.
was arrested journalists
Right
on the
And-
scene. Yeah,
and that's not how you do that. But the sad part of the untold story to me of Echo Park is that county wasn't there, and it can't be all on LA City to solve homelessness. That's the problem with solving it. So people are very mad at Mike Bonin in Venice, or they're furious with Mitch O'Farrell in Echo Park, or Bob Blumenfield's catching an earful in Encino, or Canoga Park or Woodland Hills. But it's unfair for us at the county or the state level to kind of hide behind those tricky politics on the ground and say, no, you guys figure it out. What should happen is anytime a city council person who's close to the ground, right? We were talking earlier, 5 soups, but a lot more city council members. Let them be the ones to source those problems, to see what's happening. Come ask their service arm at the county for help, and let's send in teams that can actually work that problem. So if they had teams of psychiatric social workers and public health nurses in that community doing that work and stabilizing people before they come in, right? Like you can even get medication in some cases administered before you're into the housing. So if you come in and you're fully decompensated and you've had a psychotic break and you haven't broken your methamphetamine addiction and you get handed a Project Home Key and you're holding it in your hand, you walk into that room and they lead you to the door, how long do you think you're gonna last in that room? You need help. And the city's plan is inherently inadequate of that shelter. If we offer you shelter, then we can move your encampment. It's not enough. Right to shelter is not a humane enough or comprehensive enough response to homelessness.
What do you say to somebody, though, who says, State Senator Henry Stern, why have you not, you're in the legislature,
Yeah.
you can do something about
Yeah.
this, you can author a bill, you can come to LA more often. It's
you
not
should-
your district, but I'm just asking.
No, yeah, funny you should mention, I do have a bill.
Okay.
I don't know if it's the be all end all, but it's a different approach than LA City has taken, and it puts powers to bear that the state is responsible for putting forward. A right to treatment, not just shelter. So it's a right to treatment for those who are the most at risk on our streets, so that you're not just going to get a home key and say, good luck at the Cadillac Motel or the 818 or whatever room you got, but with that, you're going to get a navigator, a social worker, someone to ensure that you're adhering to your medication, someone to help you navigate your Medi-Cal billing.
And right now there are 30 people doing that.
Well, right, yeah, there are 30 doing the mobile psychiatric work, and frankly, Medi-Cal doesn't even reimburse at this point for most of the care we need. And so the state is very much a player in this and has an obligation to step up and help county and the city. The feds need to do the same, because unless we change our entitlement program, right, and we actually guarantee people the right to that treatment, it's never going to be abundant enough. If it's just a couple grants here and there and you're like, okay, here's a year, we'll do a pilot and see what happens, but maybe you hire up to 100. But people want to make this their whole career, serving people on the streets. So let's build a behavioral health workforce in LA that's an army of care and compassion, and stop playing so lean. That takes the state of California. So SB 1446 is our attempt to establish a right to treatment in California law. It's literally one sentence, but it would force changes in that millionaire's tax I was talking to Nick about, in Medi-Cal, and create sustainable, continuous funding through our healthcare system. And that's the missing piece. The private health insurers and Medi-Cal are not pulling their weight in this. And we're sort of treating it as just a housing problem, and it squishes past that line. It's also a health problem.
It's multi-layered.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to get to the audience questions.
Yeah, please.
Before we wrap up, but one more thing on homelessness before we let you go about that, and that is, if you had to point to just one thing that is the failure, where has the city of LA or the county of LA or the state of California failed in the homeless crisis that we have before us? What's been the failure?
I guess it's it's the failure to take risks politically, to be politically generous, to help when you see it's not so much a policy mechanism. It's not so much a missed funding opportunity or a ballot initiative that wasn't run.
There's money.
It's about, people look at this mayor's race and they say, okay, next mayor needs to solve homelessness. Well, what they don't realize is the entire mental health services department, the entire healthcare Medi-Cal system is all run by county. So if we're politically generous at the county, and we're not saying like, what's your jurisdiction and what's ours, but let's blast past jurisdictions and lines and go do the hard stuff. If you say, do some adaptive reuse and buy an old hotel and the community's really mad at that city council member, I, as a supervisor, it's a good project, I got to step up and take that heat too. Like, it's not fair to push all that political tension down to the city level. So it's easy to point our finger at City Hall, and by all means, I mean, they do not completely have their act together, and I still think our political culture is somewhat broken. There's too much money and too much machine politics, and I don't like the vibe, if you will. But I think there's some way to change that that's a little more subtle than just one bill or one budget item. I think it's about showing political vulnerability. I think it's about making yourself accessible to your city council people. And, we got more cities than just LA in this district too,
88
right?
of them.
Yeah, so, I mean, you've got to help every one of those cities, arm them with the tools, with the budgets, and with the political capital to say, go do something really hard, but we'll back you up. And maybe forget backing you up. How about we go first? How about we be generous and we go first with our services? And then you figure out, which bed ribbon cutting we're doing. So I don't know. That's the part of it all that I think has to change.
From the audience, thousands of county workers are under threat of termination over the current employee vaccine mandate. Still going on. Do you support employee vaccine mandates?
I do in certain applications. I don't, the hard thing is right now, there's going to be a bill before the legislature to do it across the board in private sector as well as public.
What applications do you not support it?
I would say right now where you're not having a lot of interaction with the public, if you're not sort of directly putting people at risk, when it comes to the vaccine mandate, even how it's administered and enforced it's really important how we do that. If the government itself isn't requiring it of its own people, like in the legislature right now, we're not requiring a vaccine mandate of our employees or of our colleagues. We can do whatever we want in the state capitol. So until we impose that on ourselves, I have a really hard time sort of telling everyone else what to do. But look, we need to get over that herd immunity threshold. We need comprehensive antibody testing too to really understand where we stand from an immunity perspective. But look, we had to do this, and Ferrer did the right thing on that front, and I think County did the right thing. But now that
she's not in control of a vaccine mandate, though.
No, but I mean that's how county policy was being administered through public health department. So, yeah, if we're going to do it, we have to do it to ourselves. That's what I'd say. But it's been necessary. Now maybe with the variant changing and levels, sort of impacts going a different direction. I don't know. I'm still struggling. All I would say is we need to be clear about the math that we're doing, to show our math at the county level and not just say follow the science and sort of assume that there's one answer. I think that people have gotten a little tired of us with the self-certainty, and there have been mistakes, and maybe we've overdone it or maybe we've underdone it, right? Like I think we opened up too quickly in some ways, but we should have opened up earlier in others for people who were vaccinated. So give more people who were vaccinated the freedom to go to the movies way early on in the pandemic. But then after the fact, when we've made you all sit at home for so long, then to open it all up and say, go for it and shoot off the confetti cannons felt, tone deaf to me too. So I think we're very close to a place of some equitable immunity. And I think, vaccines are the central piece of that whole puzzle.
What is your stance on defunding the police?
I don't like that paradigm. I don't think that's.
You said you're not an extremes guy, right? That's one side of the coin, and then the other side is more police.
I just don't think we have to choose. Like, I don't see why that has to be the choice. I mean, when people talk about defunding the police or defunding the sheriff's department, they say, well, we've got to do this in order to fund behavioral health or we've got to do this in order to fund diversion or find new housing for people. But the state is flush. We have never been in a better budget situation. So why do we have to drive that wedge and say, are you for defunding the police, or are you for everyone is homeless and suffering? We can solve both problems. So I think that posture and the politics of that are important for people to say we're angry and we're mad at the police department or we're mad at the sheriff's department, but I don't think we find our way through this by sort of telling everyone who's working there, you shouldn't have a job anymore.
Do you believe there are reforms that need to be done
yes.
within law enforcement?
Absolutely. I mean, I helped pass SB2, which was we decertify officers now for misconduct.
Is there enough being done, though, at the local level?
No, I think that more does have to be done, and I think that it gets down to this current tussle between the board and the sheriff. I think the sheriff should do his own disciplining as well, and not just be the good news guy to say like they're breathing down your necks, but I'm going to protect you. The sheriff has an interest in having a department that's upstanding, that has the support of the public, but at the same time, I think everyone's in such a foxhole with it, right? The sheriff's role and all the deputies are saying, you're trying to say defund us. You're trying to get rid of our jobs entirely. We got to switch our attitude about that and say, no, we're actually not trying to get rid of your jobs. We just want to help you do the job you do, which is go deal with violent crime or go deal with really hard things, but maybe don't deal with schizophrenia on a daily basis, or don't deal with housing issues. And so, I don't know. I just like to see us start actually working through the problems and not just kind of drawing lines and say, which side are you on?
This is something that we've talked about on our show on Greater LA. What is your position on the Santa Susana Field Lab cleanup? This is in the far west valley.
Glad you brought it up. Yeah, West Valley and into Ventura County.
Right, into Ventura County. So do you believe in a risk-based cleanup, which is what the federal EPA would do?
Yeah, so I've been the senator of jurisdiction for that incredibly toxic situation. No, I don't think that you can let Boeing or the federal government off the hook and just say, we want to minimize the amount of soil we're bringing off the mountain. We've got to do what public health demands. And I think, I know too many moms and kids out there, cancer clusters and all kinds of other tragedies happening in that community. It's like the Chatsworth and Simi Valley communities. Most people don't know that we tested the rockets that sent us to the moon up in those hills.
Rocketdyne, right.
And by the way, the blast furnaces that we were using weren't encased. So there's cesium up there, and there's, all kinds of other heavy metals, and it's still up there. People don't realize it. So
yeah, it never got cleaned up.
I want public health to dictate the outcomes, not so much like a risk basis where what can we afford to do? Because Boeing, last I checked, is a pretty good looking rating on the stock market. So I think they can do a little more, and NASA and DOE have to step up too. So we're hoping the Newsom administration cuts a deal that that doesn't cut the community out. And if it means we got to go to court with the company, then we got to do it. But I think, we want to get past the posture and actually start getting toxic soil off the mountain. And I'd rather do that without truck trips. So I got some ideas for how to pull that radioactive material in a nice sealed air tram, essentially down to a rail spur that maybe wouldn't make the valley so scared of these radioactive trucks coming through their backyard too.
Have you ever supported a legislative program that did not require more money and thus more taxes?
Yes.
That's point on.
Yes.
Yeah.
You made me spill my water.
I'm sorry.
No, I mean that's a lot of our work has been oversight and asking folks to do more with what they got. So on the fire budget, for instance, I didn't go, trying to raise a new tax on our fire communities. I was saying that get Southern California its fair share. We get 5% of the state wildfire resilience budget, and we need to up those numbers. So we ran a bill to change that. Or this audit I was just talking about of the mental health services program in LA, right? That was saying, what are you doing with the current money? And you've got to do more with what you got. It shouldn't just be a tax increase. So, I don't know. The Valley especially, I think historically has had a fiscal conservatism to it where they're saying, you better be delivering for us, and they feel left behind. But I think the West Side's sort of taken that attitude on too now, where they're saying, we've paid a lot in. So yeah, that's been a pretty central focus, I'll say. We weren't doing a lot of revenue raising. It was more like, the oil industry, for instance, right now, they are not liable for all the wells they leave behind. the law allows them to just put those costs on the taxpayer. So we need to be actually holding the oil industry liable for all the wells in LA, not taxpayers. So with Aliso and everything else, I'm always reticent of a publicly financed solution.
I want to thank you for your time tonight. State Senator Henry Stern running for the LA County Board of Supervisors post. This is District 3, the seat being vacated by Sheila Kuehl, who's currently there. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
No, it was great to be here, and hopefully people tune in. I mean,
Well, we have a couple more this week, too.
county matters.
The county, of course, matters. 10 million people in the county. So tomorrow we're going to talk with another candidate, the West Hollywood City Council member, Lindsay Horvath. I hope you'll join us then. I'd like to give a special thanks to all of us at KCRW and KPCC and LAist. Thank you guys so much for putting this together here at our studios in Santa Monica. These virtual events made possible by support from the Committee for Greater LA in partnership with the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation and the Weingart Foundation. For all of us here at our LA Public Radio Consortium, I'm Steve Chiatakis. Good night.